Hello everyone, in this video we are going to go through an overview of Grenshiel. And Grenshiel is pretty much an 80% power creep of Altemuller. I think this is the most direct power creep comparison we've had in Languisher in quite a while, because they just have so many similar things together. Like, they are both flying units that are physical bruisers, and they both provide buffs for the strategic faction, and they can both guard against physical attacks in a pinch as well if necessary. So the only thing that Altemuller has that Grenshiel doesn't is actually the fact that his buff provides Terrain Master for his faction unit, and the fact that he has a little bit of physical sustain in terms of melee combat in his SP class. But Grenshiel also has a whole lot of other things that Altemuller doesn't have. So without further ado, let's hop right into the unit. So in her talent, there's basically two parts. The first part is that you will get an attack and defense buff when you are entering single target combat against units whose mobility are not greater than the caster. So not greater than, so if you are equal, you will still get the buff. So Grenshiel is usually 5 mobility. So if the target you're trying to hit or the target that's trying to hit you has 6 mobility or more, then you will not benefit from this buff. So what this means is that actually breeze procs will matter, in the sense that, if you are trying to hit like SP Leon in the future, if the Leon has a breeze buff, which is basically 7 mobility, your Grenshiel will not be able to get this stat increase when you target the Leon. So on the flip side, if you proc breeze on yourself, that will matter into the calculation as well. So just keep that in mind for this buff. The second part of her talent is basically, after taking action, if you are in the enemy's danger zone, you will gain a shield. And this shield will provide you an immunity to all debuffs, which is pretty balanced. And then this will also block damage up to 25% of your max health at 6 stars. It goes up. So that's the main thing. There's this part in the middle where when attacked and forced into battle, you will gain a command. Reduces the mobility of all enemies within 1 block by 2 for 1 turn. The way they word it is a little bit confusing, so you can split this buff itself into 2 parts as well. So you will get the shield when you enter danger zone, and this shield will provide you immunity and block up to a quarter of your max HP. And then the second part is, while you have the shield buff, if you get targeted by a single target attack, you will gain this command effect. The command effect lasts for 1 turn. So what this means is that it doesn't matter if your shield has been chipped off, so that you have 1 HP left of your shield, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your enemy doesn't manage to even break your shield. It doesn't matter. As long as you get hit by a single target attack while you have the shield, you will gain this command. On the flip side, if you have shield and you get hit by an AoE and you lose all your shield HP, you will not get this command. It has to be single target combat. And for the shield itself, the cooldown will start when it gets consumed. So it doesn't start when you gain the shield. It starts when the shield is consumed. And it will be regained after 1 turn at 6 stars. So that's the talent out of the way. For her skills, pretty much you will almost always bring 1 and 3 cost skill. Like these are bread and butter. And then for 2 cost skill, she actually has a bunch of different options. So let's start from her 1 cost skill, which is her main mechanic, Cold Shield. So this basically applies the Cold Shield to a target empty block, and it's a terrain effect, this Cold Shield, which will gain the command which increases defense and magic defense of all allies within 2 blocks by 10%, and it reduces the mobility of all enemies within 1 block by 2. And this terrain only lasts 1 turn. But terrain is a little bit weird in Languisher mechanics. It's like spaghetti coding stuff. So this actually lasts 2 turns. Like, it's minimum 1 turn, but like pretty much it's technically 2 turns. And then after you prop down this terrain effect, you can move an additional 3 blocks and attack again after using this skill. There's a bunch that I want to go through about this skill in terms of actual gameplay, so I will cover that at the later part of this video. But for now, you can just think of it as you'll be able to target a block within 3 blocks of yourself, you will plant down this terrain, which is, you know, a single target, like it covers 1 block only. And then after that, you can act again 3 blocks and attack. So her 3C skill, Conquest of Winter. So there's 2 parts. One part is the actual attack, and the passive is basically her faction buff for strategic. This buff will basically provide, you know, the usual attack, defense, magic defense, and on top of that, the buff where if you are fighting units with mobility not higher than the caster, you will deal extra 15% increased damage, which is basically almost identical as a talent, but her talent gives attack and defense. Her faction buff gives 15% increased damage. So this is more prevalent for units that have base 5 mobility. It's a little bit harder to trigger on base 3 movement units like, you know, Lost Ham or maybe McLean. But if you get a breeze proc or if you have mobility support, you could still benefit from this. And the way to trigger this buff is, the first time you will trigger it is when Grenshiel ends her first action. Let's see, where does it say it? After taking action for the first time, right at the top. So whenever you end turn on the first time, or even if you like act again directly on turn 1, you will trigger this buff. And after that, you will have to get a strategic master unit to kill an enemy to refresh this buff. So this means that her buff is actually not super consistent. You basically have to keep getting kills with any strategic units to be able to refresh this buff. So something that you will want to take note of. As for the attack itself, it's a 1.8 times, which I like to call a sword soul type skill. But this only dispels 3 buffs before battle. If the target unit's movement type is not flying, the caster will attack first. So this thing is unit's movement type is not flying. It's not the class type. So units like, you know, basic example will be like Boaster with Sorcerers. You know, their unit movement will be considered as flying, and then you will not attack first. The flip side, if you are a flyer unit like Wet Ham and you bring Werewolves, your movement type is actually infantry type, and then Grenshiel will trigger the attack first. So that's what this part means. Oops. And then after battle, you will render them to be immobilized, which basically means they cannot move at all, 0 movement, and this will block any guarding mechanics as well. And then Grenshiel herself will gain a buff where she takes 20% reduced damage. So this is considered a generic buff, but because this is undispellable, this thing will actually take priority over a Tenure buff. I think Tenure is the only other way to get a 20% reduced damage, other than like Smoke or some shit. So even if you have 2 turns of the Tenure buff, it will get overwritten by this because, you know, it takes priority. And then yeah, so all these effects are, you know, last 1 turn and they cannot be dispelled. So it's mobility down debuff as well. So yeah, that's it for her 3C. It's pretty simple actually. It's just a buff and an attack. And then for her 2 cost skills, the skill that you could bring will be Iron Fist, Air Slash, or Frontal Assault most of the time. Iron Fist is very straightforward. You bring it if you want to guard physical attacks. Then, you know, this thing itself, it will give you attack buff if you happen to run out of your faction buff, so it could come in handy depending on the scenario. And then it gives you parry, which is whatever. Air Slash would be the usual single target attack of choice because it's 2 range, and you know, I don't need to explain what Air Slash does. Same for Frontal Assault, you will usually bring it if you want to kill a unit with a passive revive like McLean or Archon of the Moon. You'll bring Frontal Assault basically. And I forgot to mention this, it's the AoE. Sometimes you could bring this as well. It does 0.36 times AoE damage within 2 blocks, and it also applies the mobility -2 to all enemies for 2 turns, which is quite important because most mobility debuffs in the game, at least up until current units, most of the time their mobility debuffs actually only last for 1 turn. So this 2 turn is actually pretty big because if you don't have this spell, your tank is basically dead for 2 turns. And if the enemy already has a mobility reduction effect, it could be from your cold shield, you know, it could be from your immobilize, it could be anything. If they already have a mobility reduction effect, then you have a 20% chance to just stun them. And then after using this skill, you will gain block for 2 turns, which is a very weird passive to get for an AoE skill. Block is basically the percentage chance to reduce the damage you take, either from a melee or physical attack. I actually don't remember. But I think it's physical, no, I think it's melee attack. So yeah, it's just kind of there. It doesn't really synergize with the AoE itself, but it synergizes with the fact that Grenshiel is a bulky ass unit. So the AoE itself is small, so it's not very common to bring it, but if you just need your Grenshiel to just disable the enemy tanks, and if they don't have Dispel, this is actually a pretty good skill to bring. So that's it for her skills. As for her class, she has 2 classes, which is one that's an infantry and there's a flyer class. This is a pretty no-brainer. You will mostly just use her as a flyer, although it's worth noting that her infantry is actually a 4 movement flying type unit. So you can actually still bring flyers and basically have flying movement if you're playing her in infantry class for whatever reason. I don't think there's a good reason to, like the stats are not better than the flyer one. So yeah, just go flyer. And then for her mastery stones, HP, attack, defense, standard, bruiser, build. And for arena stones, you will tack on double suffered crit. Because, well, she's not very crit reliant per se. Like, she mostly just wants to tank, so the minus crit makes sense. As for her soldiers, she has a couple of them, but most commonly you will see War Falcon and Unicorns. And you know, War Falcons, like, she has a bunch of flyer units and they're all actually pretty decent units, but if you look at the base stats, you'll realize that War Falcon is actually basically a power creep of troops. And that's just not just base stats as well. Her effect is actually very good. So what this troop does is, again, when fighting an enemy unit whose mobility is not greater than this unit, you will get attack and defense 30% for the troop, not for the hero, keep that in mind. But yeah, so that's a third form of extra damage when you have equal or greater mobility than the enemy. So you will need to keep that in mind in terms of damage output. If you are trying to hit someone that has more mobility than you, your damage is going to be very significantly different. And other than that, if the hero's class type is flyer, you will take 30% decreased damage when actively attacking. So this is, you know, pretty nice. You get to keep more HP on your troops when you attack someone that counterattacks you. So yeah, this is the most common troop because of flying movement, and it's also her bulkiest troop, especially when there is a terrain map. The other troop that you will usually see on her would be unicorns. So, well, you're no stranger to this troop, and you will usually bring this if you're particularly trying to target something like a Gintoki, or if you're confident the enemy tank will be bringing infantry troops and you want to tank bus, or if you're trying to benefit from like non-flyer things like Polial's terrain, then you will consider unicorns. She does have Guardian Infantry and Galen Duelists as infantry troops, which is technically bulkier than flyer units if you're off terrain, but I've pretty much never seen anyone bring these, but I think technically speaking they could be an option. But if you don't know what you're doing, just ignore this and stick to War Falcons and Unicorns. As for her gear, it's pretty much a carbon copy of Altemuller's set. Ragnarok, Last Rites, Swordsmith Medal. In the helmet slot, you can kind of go with a few options because, you know, Altemuller has its exclusive. For me, my personal preference would be the Flower Boon Bonnet, because this provides her with sustain when she is lower health than 50%, which is her only form of self-healing actually. Like, she's very bulky, but she has no actual healing when you take chip damage. So this is actually going to be very important if you happen to go into like a late game brawl with her, where, you know, skills are mostly exhausted and you're just normal attacking each other. This heal will be pretty big in those scenarios. And also if you happen to tank an attack with very low health, which you usually will be, like, if someone misses a kill on you, you are probably going to be below 50%, so that heal will be very welcome. If you don't like that option, you could also go for the Demon's Dragon Gaze if you are focusing on her bulkiness. And if you want her to support some damage, then you could go for King's Crown as well. It's kind of up to you for this slot. But Flower Bloom Bonnet would be my preference. Enchant wise, it's mainly between Breeze and Full Moon. Breeze, for offensive purposes, you get a Breeze proc, which will allow you to place the terrain effect on their tank, and then you get your kill. Full Moon if you just wanna go all in on survivability. It's not bad for damage, but it's slightly more difficult to engage as your range will be very predictable. Okay, so let's see Grenshiel in action. So if you played through her previous stage, you should roughly know how her mechanics work. And just to demonstrate, usually what you would do is you would go next to the enemy tank, you will put down your cold shield next to the tank, and then you basically disable his guard, and then you do your attack. So you can see here there's a debuff, mobility -2, cannot use guard skills. There's no duration on it because it depends on the terrain effect itself. So that's the basic way to use Grenshiel. So couple of things that you might not notice if you don't pay attention. The first thing is that cold shield can be placed on sky tiles. So what this means is that, in particular for the sky map in Apex, this is actually a pretty big threat if you don't have a flying unit of your own, because usually the way you defend against Grenshiel as a tank push team would be you stand in a cross formation, something like this, and then you have a unit above and below as well. And then you just surround and then you just don't move. Grenshiel cannot bypass guard and she will have to just hit your tank at some point if you're in a deadlock. But on the sky map, if you don't have a flying unit to defend in that way, you will leave basically a sky tile open, and if Grenshiel can reach to place the tile on basically that sky tile, then she gets to do a thing. So she's a bit bigger of a threat on sky map. And then the next thing about her cold shield is that for some reason it's considered a weak terrain. So what this means is that let's go here and do this. Any portals. So this doesn't really matter for friendly or enemy. Her cold shield will not be able to override stronger terrain effects. So in the current version, I guess that would be Yanni's portals, Zelda 2 Soul Scrap being the two most common ones. And then there's also things like Dion's Chakram and Caroline's Spear as well. Those are the main strong terrain effects as well. So what this means is that, if you're fighting an opponent Grenshiel and you want to defend against your tank, or not defend against, but like defend your tank against Grenshiel, you can actually substitute Yanni's portal for a unit in that cross formation, so that you can free up one of your units to do something else or just be elsewhere, like to zone enemy, or if you're trying to block against displacement or whatever. This basically frees up that slot for your tank, as long as you don't move, I guess, because it's still very difficult to move against Grenshiel while maintaining that formation. So that's the main thing. And the other thing is that because it's considered a basic terrain, which is like pretty much every other terrain in the game except for the stronger ones, it means that they override each other regardless of it being friendly or enemy terrain. So if you are playing with a friendly mech lane, let's say if your Grenshiel went in, you drop the cold shield next to the enemy tank, and then you do your attack. And then if you have a mech lane and you do an AoE on that particular tile, and that means that it will get overwritten and become a mech lane tile, which means that their tank will resume guarding if they are not already disabled before that. So you have to be careful when using friendly terrain effects. And if you are fighting against Grenshiel, then you should also know that you can use your terrain effects to override her cold shield. So to end off this video, I'm going to kind of compile the different sources of mobility reduction that Grenshiel has, because I think she basically just plays around mobility debuffs actually. Some of them can be blocked by immunity and others cannot. So the first source of mobility reduction would be from her talent, which is from the command. So what you need to know about this is that this only triggers if you single target her while she has the shield buff. So it's like a double layer. She has the shield buff, and then when you hit her with the shield buff, she will get this command. So it doesn't exist with the shield buff, but it appears if you attack her while she has the shield buff. And the command itself is basically identical to Code Shield, except that Code Shield is based around on that particular tile, and then for a talent it's based around Grenshiel. So most of the time this won't come into effect. You just need to be careful that if you happen to trigger her command, don't move your units next to her, otherwise they will suffer from this mobility debuff. Then her main other source would be from her 3C. If she hits your tank directly, she will root your tank, and this root will prevent guard as well. So I just want to mention here that if you have any effects that allow you to skip blocks, like Leon motorbikes, Polia tiles, Wingod Realm, you can actually still move. They are separate from mobility debuffs. Even though you have 0 mobility, you can still skip a tile. So if that makes sense. And finally, the last source would be from her AoE. And just the main thing you want to notice is that it lasts for 2 turns. So if you don't have this spell, this thing can pretty much fuck up your tank for pretty much the rest of the game. Like, they can end the game within 2 turns if they disable your tank most of the time. So yeah. So just to put this out there, then yeah, that's about it for Grenshiel. So hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in the next video. Peace.